You opened up a whole new area, Lord Denning, in the 1950s for the use of declaratory judgments as a remedy for the citizen. And that arose out of a case from the London docks after a big strike about unloading sugar.
I remember it. Yeah.
And you got around the problem that when the citizen was asking for one of the old prerogative remedies like certiorari to quash something wrong that some authority or tribunal had decided, he couldn't get discovery of documents so as to be able to see the papers and see if there was anything wrong in law. But you were able to get round that by giving him a declaratory judgment, which is just an ordinary remedy available in an ordinary action where you have the full benefit of interlocutory procedure, so he could see the papers.
Yes, well, now that was a most important case. There was trouble in the London docks. The port manager dismissed one of the men. But when we saw all the documents, we found that port manager had no authority from the Port of London Authority on his own to do it. Now, the old method of going by what we call certiorari to quash or do anything like that would not have been any good. You wouldn't have seen any of the internal documents of the Port of London Authority. But he brought an action for a declaration. And that was, I remember the argument then of Mr. Gilbert Paul, as he was. He said, you can't admit declarations here. It'll be in effect an appeal. The courts will be swamped with claims for a declaration. If once you admit this sort of case here instead of certiorari, well, we weren't perturbed by all these threats. And we gave a declaration that the port manager had no authority and the man was wrongfully dismissed and he ought to have been there still. That's a most important decision because that was the basis of a most extended jurisdiction of declarations and injunctions instead of that old machinery by a prerogative writ. In fact, I think that might also be called a landmark. It didn't go to the House of Lords, but in fact they approved it later on in the case of Oldbine. But that was a most important jurisdiction whereby we used declarations instead. And mark you, that was extended in all the important cases in administrative law. Ridge and Baldwin was a claim for a declaration. Anismitic was a claim for a declaration. None of those landmarks in administrative law would have occurred unless we had brought in this great remedy of declaration and injunction which enabled you to get discovery. That is, see all the other side's documents in order to arrive at the truth of the case. In a way, well, I think that was perhaps a great procedural reform on which was dependent the whole development of our administrative law in our time.
So that was a case where the House of Lords did back you up, at any rate.
Well, yes, didn't go to the Lords, but indirectly they did.
The later cases, Pick's Granite and the Vine case, were cases where they followed exactly your...
Pick's Granite was a very case. Lord Simmons there declared, by no instance will be allowed any intrusion into the jurisdiction of the courts of law.
But then there were snags with the declaration too, because it turned out that the declaration had not got the liberal doctrine of standing, which was the great virtue of the old prerogative remedies. So that while it might be very useful to you if you needed discovery of documents, it might not be any good if you hadn't a sufficient personal interest. So we seem to be in a dilemma. There were virtues on one side with one lot of remedies and the others on the other side with another. But unless you chose the right one at the outset, you might get stuck.
Yes, well, of course, I dislike that Goya case I've already shown you already. That made too much limitation on it. But on the other hand, what I am glad to say that a lot of those troubles have been wiped out by the new process of judicial review. We've combined them all. Of course, I was very interested in that. This is where the Law Commission, if I may say so, did a first-rate job in reforming our law. The Law Commission made a report and recommendations on which new rules of court, Order 53, was brought into operation, later put into a statute in which it's combined all those remedies, the old remedies of certiorari, mandamus, and the like, and combined with declarations, they can be all given by the High Court judge. You can also give damages. And it means it is a complete reform. It was supposed only to be for remedies, not to affect the real substance of the law. But it's been so operated under this new system of judicial review, we've practically got an administrative code by which the judges of the High Court do look into all these decisions of tribunals and inquiries, and they can award either certiorari to quash, they can give a declaration of right, they can grant injunctions, they can grant damages, and the only qualification is the one who comes has got to have a sufficient interest to come to the court. Well, I want to see that extended. I hope it will be, so as to give remedy to anyone who's got a genuine interest in the case to come. But you've got to remember this limitation now. It only applies to public authorities. And there the courts have got a nice line to draw. What is a public authority? Government departments are, local governments are. We have like the compensation for injuries, tribal thing and so on. There's going to be a nice sphere of operation. How many bodies can be caught by the new system of remedy of judicial review?
And who's going to be able to use it? In the Fleet Street Casuals case, the House of Lords gave what seemed rather like 5 different shades of opinion about that. But according to the most liberal opinion, Lord Diplock's I think it was, there is the same rule now under the new procedure for all the remedies. You can get them all in the alternative, either the old prerogative remedies or declaration and injunction. You can have any or all of them in the same form of proceeding, so that you can no longer get stuck by choosing the wrong channel. And that does seem now to give the best of all worlds, and in fact to make a substantial change in substantive law and not only in procedure.
Yes, I quite agree, and I quite agree with Lord Diplock, and I hope his view will come to prevail, namely that although this was said to be a change in procedure, it's opened the remedies virtually to any public-spirited citizen, I may put it that way, who wants to see the law enforced, and gives remedies for many injustices which would otherwise have gone without remedy.
And yet, since we had this reform, which I think we all agree was an excellent step forward, there have been more cases in the courts about whether the right remedy has been chosen than there were before, because there's been a whole stream of decisions about whether you have to use application for judicial review in every case in which you can use application for judicial review.
Well, we had that in a great case about the prisoners at Hull Prison and the like, and whether they'd been deprived of their remission of their sentences, because they'd been guilty of bad conduct. And they complained that the inquiry about it had not been conducted in accordance with natural justice. Well, that could be reviewed and was reviewed by judicial review. Then some months later, or maybe a year or two later, some of them sought to go by declaration. And the House of Lords, approving us, said, well, you ought to have gone by judicial review. We can't have you exploiting declarations separately in an action of that kind. And so we've almost gone full circle. Now that in many of these cases, the one proper remedy is judicial review and not an ordinary action. But as you say, there's a great deal of wobbling. People don't know which remedy they ought to go for, one or the other. But I'll hope it will be solved. It's one of the outstanding questions of it. And for myself, if there's any doubt, I should have thought, let him go by the ordinary action at law as he always has done. But it's only in plain cases he should go by judicial review. But that's anticipating decisions which the courts will have to make in the future. The big problem, do you go by judicial review or do you go by an action for declaration?